Does Brett Baty have an inside track to breaking camp with the New York Mets? On today's show, I'm going to break down that and some other way too early takeaways from our first little bit of spring training action.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app right at FanDuel.com to get started. Well, we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about Brett Baty and Luisangel Acuña, as I really do believe this is the battle in camp that's most interesting to watch, to see which one of these two guys ends up breaking camp as part of the big league roster and gets that bench utility infielder role. But this was a three-man race at the beginning of camp that might have just become a two-man race, as Nick Madrigal went down on Sunday with a dislocated shoulder. That was a weird play where Madrigal was starting at shortstop, something that he hasn't really done in the past much in the big leagues, but the Mets are trying to see if he can field that position. There's a ground ball that hits off the pitcher, which leads to that sort of change of direction where the fielder is running towards where the ball is hit off the bat, but then has to make that adjustment. He's coming in on a ball. He goes to barehanded, seems to lose his footing a little bit as he's reaching down. Somehow he dislocates his shoulder. So the Mets are going to get an MRI on that shoulder. We're not sure what the timetable is for his return, but you would think this probably rules him out for opening day. Not to say that we're not going to see him in spring training again. You never know what the timetable might be. I mean, they might have been able to pop that shoulder back into place, and there might not be any other real damage there. And who knows? I mean, I'm not an expert as far as injuries. I couldn't tell you, but even if he misses 2 weeks on the absolute lowest end, and potentially it could be great, much greater than that, but even if it is just a short absence, he is missing valuable games to prove himself. And I really think he was on the outside looking in to get a spot anyway. I think the Mets signed Nick Madrigal over Iglesias because I think that was the big talk when Madrigal went down. I know I sent a text out to our Locked On Mets insiders, and the response I got back, I'd say 9 out of 10 times, was Jose Iglesias? Is OMG coming back? Where's Candelita? Because we always love the free agent transactions, and this is one of the guys that's still out there that makes sense for the Mets to potentially go out and sign. But I don't believe that this injury pushed us any closer to that reality. I think the only way Iglesias was coming back to the Mets is if he really did hold out on any other opportunities until close to opening day, which he could choose to do. I think if he has big league offers on the table, which has been reported that he does, he should just take those offers, go into camp, and make sure he has a good season. But I understand he's holding out hope that the Mets will sign him. I think the only way that Iglesias would have gotten signed, it wasn't because Madrigal goes down with an injury. I think it's because Baty and Acuña fall flat in their face in spring training and aren't showing enough to get that opportunity. Because what did David Stern say when he responded to the idea of signing Iglesias? He said it's important to not lock your roster in, to keep your roster flexible, to give your young players a pathway to the big leagues, to get some playing time. Right now, if the Mets are healthy all year, which is obviously not going to happen, but still follow me down the hypothetical highway, if you sign Iglesias, there is literally no room for any of your young players. And you have a lot of guys that should get big league time this year, two of them being Baty and Acuña, the third one being Ronnie Mauricio, who I think is unlikely to break camp because he's probably not going to play in any games until maybe the middle of March. I think he needs that time to play every day in Syracuse, get back to being who he used to be, maybe even a better version of his old self. And I think he just has to shake off the rust. But at some point this year, you want to leave that pathway to Mauricio maybe coming up, as well as, of course, Baty and Acuña. I think that was always the biggest driving factor in not signing Iglesias. Also, I'm sure probably meeting whatever price tag Iglesias wanted. If he wants $5 million and you're the Mets and you're trying to stay a little bit more rigid on the spending and on the budget and not spending just to spend, you can look at the cost of Iglesias, whether it is $5 million more or less, and just say, you know what? We have young players that can fill that role. And for the long-term outlook of our franchise, those young players are guys that we need to learn things about. Those young players are guys that maybe provide a little bit more of an upside than a Jose Iglesias who's 35 years old. So even though everybody, or I wouldn't say everybody, but I'd say a large portion of the fan base wants Iglesias back, I'm still not counting on it. And I certainly don't think that the Nick Madrigal injury does anything to push the Mets closer to that. Yes, he was a guy in camp that was your, potential. I guess it doesn't push them any closer to making that move now, is what I would say. If Iglesias is still hanging out there at the end of camp and the two guys fall flat, then yes, it maybe does, because Madrigal gave you that sure-handed defender that was your floor that you could always call on. So I will say maybe cracks the door open a little bit more. I don't want to completely throw cold water on it, but to me, this is not the type of injury where we're going to see the Mets reactionary tomorrow and sign Iglesias. Just like they didn't sign Jose Quintana after Frankie Montas went down, and Montas was set to play a much bigger role on this team than Nick Madrigal was. And the Mets did not make a panic move there. So I really just don't see Iglesias all of a sudden signing back. Although if he does, I would still welcome it. I still think the Mets are better tomorrow if they have Iglesias. I just think that they want to see what the kids have. So that leads us into the major conversation on the show today, which is that early on in camp, and we're at way too early takeaway territory, Brett Baty has gotten off to a good start. He had another good game on Sunday. He went 2 for 3, hit the ball hard every single time he came up. His first at bat, hard ground ball at 97 miles per hour, facing off against Sandy Alcantara. I'll talk about him a little bit more in the final segment today. Then, next at bat, he has a well-struck double in the gap, exit velocity of 110 miles per hour on that hit. That is really impressive. Then his final base of the day, again, an exit velocity over 100 miles per hour. He got a base hit. So 2 for 3 game on Sunday, 3 for 5 start to camp. I'm not going to say, oh, he's just won the job. But when you look at Luisangel Acuña, who went 0 for 3 for strikeout, you could say round one in a very long battle that we're going to see in camp has gone to Baty. But for me, it's not about the 3 for 5. It's about a guy that's well-positioned to win a job. And that's where I start to believe that Brett Baty has the inside track to being the Mets' utility infielder off the bench. Granted, there's still that question about his ability to play shortstop. They're having him take some grounders over there. I think that's just emergency shortstop situation. Francisco Lindor wants to start every day anyway, especially early in the season. And if he ever gets to a point where he starts to tire and you need to call in a shortstop, Acuña would always be one call away in AAA, as would Ronnie Mauricio. So you have that depth waiting for you. To me, the reason why I say Brett Baty has an inside track is because this is a guy that is suited to win a job in camp, because he's done that really the last 2 years. You look back at 2023, he did not technically break camp at the New York Mets, but he made a very strong impression that led them to an early season promotion after only 10 games spent in AAA for a guy that had, I think, maybe 6 games of AAA action in 2022. But in 23 games played in spring training, Baty hit 325 with a 460 on base, 425 slug, 885 OPS, and he played solid defense at third. That was enough for the Mets when they saw him go to AAA and hit 400 with 5 home runs in 10 games and say, all right, he's our third baseman in the future. We're going to move Eduardo Escobar into a bench platoon role, and we're calling up Baty. That was the first time where he showed the ability to win a big league job early on in the season. Last year, it happened again. It was him versus Mark Vientos for third base. Granted, I think the Mets always had a preference of Baty just based on the defense, but he really did show out defensively in camp, where it was just like, man, this guy has taken his defense to a whole nother level at third base, and he hit pretty well. Wasn't an outstanding camp, but he did post a 767 OPS, and he popped 3 home runs. Now, Vientos led the Mets in home runs. Obviously, in retrospect, he should have been the guy on opening day, but he still had a lot of work to go defensively. And so the Mets sent him to Syracuse to play third base every single day, something that didn't always happen throughout Mark Vientos' minor league career, as he would get some time at DH and time at first base. This was, all right, you are going to be a third baseman no matter what. You are a contingency plan, and it ended up working out. But when it comes to Brett Baty, 2 years running, though, he was able to find his way on the big league roster early due to strong showings in camp. I think this is a guy that works really hard, that has a great body for a baseball player. He's a big kid. He's strong. He has worked out hard to continue to add muscle mass year over year over year. He looks the part. He has a sweet swing from the left side. The problem is it hasn't always worked or hasn't ever worked at the big league level. And what I want to talk about next is going back to this conversation of Baty over Acuña. Why do projection models value Brett Baty over Acuña? And again, why do I think Baty is going to get the early run over Acuña to begin the season? I'm going to break that all down in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off, you can get in on the action. You can bet on that fourth quarter comeback. You can stay in. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or I'm picking a player to hit a clutch 3 late. I never feel like I've missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, when it comes to this discussion about Brett Baty and Luisangel Acuña, I don't want my words to get twisted. I am not saying that I believe that Brett Baty is going to be a better big leaguer than Luisangel Acuña, or that he's even a better fit to impact the club this year. I've actually argued the counter to that on this show throughout the offseason, that Acuña fits this roster more from the perspective that he is a shortstop, so he can give you a backup shortstop on the roster. He also can play center field, so he gives you some added versatility there, and he would give you a guy off the bench that can steal a bag. So I do like all the different components that Luisangel Acuña can bring to the table as a bench piece for the Mets. Now, you look at Brett Baty, and my argument is not to say, oh, he's definitely better. I do think, despite the struggles in the big leagues, he is a better hitter than Luisangel Acuña. But my argument here is not that Baty is a better player. My argument is Baty is more suited to thrive in spring training and get the first opportunity from the New York Mets because the season is long. And when it comes to development, Acuña has a lot more that he can gain from going back to AAA than Brett Baty does. Brett Baty has nothing left to prove in the minor leagues. He goes down there to AAA, he rakes, he comes back up, he struggles. He has to figure out big league pitching. It's that simple. He's not going to get anything out of going down the minor leagues other than posting some big numbers and maybe marginally improving his trade value. But even other teams are going to look at Brett Baty and say, I don't believe it until I see it at the big league level, and rightfully so. So you look at that side of it and you think about the Mets trying to take advantage of an opportunity to develop their young players by having that open spot on the bench. Baty's a guy that they can have as the early placeholder of that position, a guy who is the favorite right now, in my opinion, to break camp. And as long as he has a good camp, and he has the last couple of years, I think he takes that job. And then you see what you have. You see how the season progresses. You see what Baty does in his limited opportunities. If it looks good, you stick with Baty until some other injury opens up some other opportunity for the young guys. If it doesn't look good, well, now whoever's playing better between Acuña and Mauricio in AAA might get that next shot. You look at Acuña's career, this is his third camp. For Baty, this is his sixth big league camp. And he's gotten consistent playing time now, 2 years running. This is the third year that Brett Baty has gotten consistent playing time. Acuña has never had consistent playing time in a big league camp. The closest he got was with the Rangers in 2023, where he did play in 15 games, but he only got 22 at bats. So that's probably a guy that's coming in late, playing some defense, might not even get into all those games. I don't think that is very many spring training starts. Whereas now you're going to see Acuña start a lot of games. You're going to see Baty start a lot of games. Baty's already started 2 games in a row, which tells me a little something about the Mets really trying to see what they have here with Brett Baty and see if he can figure it out. And I know Mets fans are sour on him, but a guy that has 169 games of big league opportunities compared to 14 from Acuña, it's someone that belongs in the big leagues a little bit more right now to get those answers that the Mets need, because ultimately this is still a guy that can fool you for a little bit at least. And hopefully it's not fooling us. He actually becomes a good player, but you watch him hit that double. Yes, it's spring training. Yes, it was a pitcher that missed his pitch, but it was still 95 miles per hour, and Baty turned on it with ease and drove it with authority. So I look at Brett Baty from that perspective, from the perspective of a guy that has potential that the Mets want to see what they have in. And I just think that there's a better chance that he ends up finding that spot in the opening day roster. You also look at what he did last year from a plate discipline perspective. His walk rate improved and his strikeout rate was cut a little bit. He walked 7.5% of the time in 2023. He bumped it up to 9.4% last year. His strikeouts dropped from 28% to just under 25%. So if you see some more steady progression there for him, things can work out. You look at the projection models, and this is based on what you've done in the minor leagues and the big leagues, how hard you hit the baseball, all these different factors that Zips for Fangraphs will use to determine what a player is going to be this season. Acuña coming off a year, he posted a 654 OPS in AAA. Despite him being an elite defender, Brett Baty has the edge, the war edge over Acuña as being a guy who's projected to be more valuable. Zips projects Brett Baty to be a 2-win player. They project Acuña to be a 1.4-win player. They're projecting Acuña to hit 244, Brett Baty to hit 240, but to get on base at a 315 clip compared to Acuña, who would only get on base at a 289 clip. Baty, 17 home runs, a 395 slug. Acuña, 8 home runs, a 340 slug. 61 RBIs for Baty, 55 for Acuña, but 79 runs scored as he's projected to steal 29 bases over 136 games. So, look, that's probably more playing time than either of them is going to get through these projection models, and they aren't always accurate. But what it shows you is the fact that Baty has a little more juice in his bat. Now, Acuña brings more to the table defensively. He also, of course, still has the potential to be a plus offensive player if he can hit for high average, get on base at a good enough clip, and utilize that speed. But with where they're at right now, Acuña set to turn 23 in a couple weeks, Baty already 25. I just think the reality of the situation is the Mets might view this as an opportunity to let Brett Baty break camp again, see what he has, have Acuña go to the minor leagues where he struggled last year in AAA. Maybe he can post better numbers, have him move around the diamond the same way he would at the big league level. Let's see him in left field for a start. Let's see him in right field, because that might happen in the big leagues where they decide, all right, we already had Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor start the game for us, and we're already up big. We want to take Nimmo out of it in left field. Who are we going to stick out there? You could put Jesse Winker out there, or if Acuña's on your bench, you could stick Acuña out there and have 3 guys with a bunch of range in the outfield going out there and making plays. Acuña has not played much third base, really any third base in his minor league career. Have him start some games there. So there's just so many development points that Acuña can still hit in AAA, where Baty is just going to be, all right, go down there, increase your versatility. Maybe we'll start you at a couple games at shortstop just to see what it looks like. We're going to keep playing you at second base. But really, the biggest question that has to be answered can't until he gets up to the show. For Acuña, if he posts an 800 OPS in AAA, that's a development gain. That's a guy that's improving his stock in the trade market. That's a guy that can play more positions, add to his versatility, and then he's always waiting for you. If anything ever happens to Lindor, Acuña is going to be your shortstop. So the idea that you need him to be the backup shortstop for a guy that's going to play every game, every inning, to me, it's just not necessarily as important as some make it out to be. I think Baty's going to win this job. Again, that's not to say I think he's going to have a better big league career or that he's going to have a bigger impact this season. I just think that the way the Mets are going to go through this process, they're going to land on the conclusion that Baty should be part of the opening day roster and Acuña is going to have more that he can work on in Syracuse. Anyway, in the next segment, I want to talk about a couple of the takeaways, namely Max Kranick with a strong start for the Mets. Can he be a potential impact arm in a bulk relief role? We'll go through that and touch on a couple of performances from some of the kids in camp. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. If you are an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaway. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, if you missed yesterday's show, I do encourage you to check it out because as we are going through way too early takeaways from camp and the first couple games we've seen, Clay Holmes had an outstanding start on Saturday. I broke it down in the second segment of the show, how he has a potential 6-pitch mix, has really rounded out his arsenal with a new kick change. And I think there's a good opportunity that we see Clay Holmes be not just a viable big league starter, but a quality one. So go back and check that out if you missed it on Sunday. But let's now talk about Max Kranick, who got a start in Port St. Lucie against the Marlins. He threw 36 pitches in 2 innings. 23 of them were strikes. They were two scoreless innings. He gave up a couple base hits in the first, then got a double play ball, and then struck out Connor Norby, the Marlins' best hitter, I think, at this stage, with a 96-mile-per-hour fastball up in the zone. Then in the second inning, another double play ball allowed him to navigate a little more traffic on the bases as he did give up 3 hits overall in the game. But what stood out for Kranick is the metrics on his pitches that came out after the start. And I found these courtesy of Pitch Profiler on Twitter. First, look at the 4-seam fastball. And this is the pitch that could make Max Kranick a real upside arm for the Mets. Because if you have a great fastball, you got something to work off of. Max Kranick, former starting pitcher, now being transitioned to be a bulk reliever. That fastball that he has, 96 mile per hour on average, can ramp it up a little bit higher. It has great induced vertical break. I talked about this yesterday for Clay Holmes, where I said if you have an induced vertical break over 18, that's a good fastball, borderline really good. And if you get it over 20, we're talking about an elite fastball. And I mentioned Jonah Tong, the Mets pitching prospect, who has that level of a fastball, and that's why he has skyrocketed on top prospect list. So induced vertical break is essentially ride. It's that fastball that rises, right? What does it look like? How does it stay up in the zone? So when you look at Max Kranick with the induced vertical break over 18% and a fastball that is in the mid to upper 90s, that's a pitch that's pretty elite. And the stuff plus on that fastball in this game was 140. Now, what is stuff plus? This is a metric that tells you how nasty a pitcher is or how nasty a pitch is, with an average score being 100. So anything below that is a below average pitch. Anything above that is obviously above average. So a 140 stuff plus on his 4-seam fastball, to give you some context of how good that is. Last year, Ben Joyce, who averaged 102 miles per hour, the reliever for the Angels, who touches 105, his fastball graded out with a stuff plus of 137. Now, this is just to provide some context on how elite a 140 stuff plus fastball is. But we have to remember this was one outing. One outing in spring, a couple of innings. I don't think that his fastball would grade out that well over the course of a full season. But it does illustrate how effective that pitch can be. And then he's got 3 breaking balls that he can potentially pair with it. He's got a slider, a curveball, and a sweeper. It seems like the slider and the sweeper, based on the metrics from this one outing, are better offerings. Maybe he just feels a little more comfortable throwing those pitches. But if the Mets continue to work with him and they round out his arsenal and they get him to a point where he has one breaking ball that he really trusts, or at least a couple, but I think ideally, a guy with this level of fastball, if it's fastball sweeper and his sweeper is effective, he doesn't need anything else. That's part of being a reliever, is you can shorten that mix. Granted, the hope is it can be a bulk reliever, sort of your alternative to Jose Butto if Butto ever went down, or if he was struggling. Kranick would be the guy, and you never know. Early in the season, when starting pitchers are not as built up as they will be once they get into midseason form, having multiple bulk inning guys could be a nice way for the Mets to navigate their pitching staff. And if Kranick can continue to pitch well, he might just have a shot to break camp in that bullpen. But even if he doesn't, he's going to be waiting in Syracuse, and we're going to see him this year. I think he has the chance to pop off with that fastball being as good as it is. And if he can really find which breaking pitch is the best one to go off it, or which couple of them, all of a sudden, I think you have a guy that can strike out a bunch of batters, also pitch to a lot of weak contact, and be an effective reliever. So that's the update on Max Kranick. Pitching opposite for him, or opposite to him for the Marlins, with Sandy Alcantara, future Met Sandy Alcantara. I'm still holding out hope that at the deadline, this is a guy the Mets will pursue. We don't know if the Mets will need an ace at that time, because who knows? Maybe Clay Holmes, Kodai Senga, and Sean Manaea are getting the job done. But Alcantara looked like his old self, routinely touching 99. A guy that just looks very much like the one that won the Cy Young a couple of years ago. But I will note Mark Vientos got hit off of him. So that was pretty cool. He faced 4 batters, retired 3 of them. But it was Vientos that got the knock, taking 99 miles per hour, low and away. Pretty well-located pitch, going with it, and, fighting it off into right field to get a single going the opposite way. So nice piece of hitting by Vientos against a guy that was clearly dialed in. Young guys who've impressed so far, Jet Williams and Ryan Clifford, each got 3 at-bats. Both came away with offers. Nick Morabito got a little bit of shine, started in left field, and he ends up getting an infield hit before promptly stealing second base. Morabito recently got a little bit of a compliment from David Stearns when he was asked on a podcast, who of your prospects that's not as highly regarded, not talked about as much, should people take note of in spring training? And he mentioned Nick Morabito. The Mets clearly like him. He's 21 years old, center fielder. They're starting to play with his versatility already, having him get some games in left and right as you're realizing the likely outcome that this might be a 4th outfielder type in the big leagues. But 4th outfielder with upside to be a little bit more if he can be a really good defender in center field. There is an outside shot. He's the center fielder of the future for the New York Mets. I don't believe that he should be considered a better prospect than a Jet Williams or even a Drew Gilbert by an extent. But this is a guy that stole 59 bases last year. Granted, he got caught 15 times, but still, you got to respect his impact on the base pass. He also hit 312. And for his career, the minor leagues, he's hit over 300. So a guy with a pretty good hit tool as far as being able to, be a good bat-to-ball guy, make contact, get on base, particularly utilizing his speed. The ball he hit today was not very well hit, but that was actually a good thing because it gave him plenty of time to beat it out. That ability to get on base potentially, especially if he can hit for high average, draws walks, and then utilize his speed, that would give him some plus assets offensively. And then as a defender, he'd obviously have to prove to be a well above average defensive center fielder, and he's definitely on the way to that with his athleticism. Nick Morabito is a guy to watch, and he's a guy I'm actually struggling to place right now in my top prospect list. I'm going to have a top 15. I don't think I'm going to stretch it to a top 20, and I've been really working through it. Morabito is one that is pushing towards top 10. I really like what he did last year, and I'm intrigued to see more. Now, another guy that had a big day on Sunday, Simone Juan, 19-year-old outfielder who had a good year at the complex last year, posted a 796 OPS as a teenager. That is not bad at all. Today, he crushed a 3-run homer, went 2 for 3 with 4 RBIs. Again, 19 years old, big, strong kid. I'm excited to see what he does this year in Port St. Lucie. He's still many years away, but he's got the chance to have some real helium to him as a top prospect this year, where he can skyrocket up the rankings. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I know I've been promising it for a little bit. As I have just alluded to, I'm still working through my top prospect list. As we continue throughout this week and throughout spring training, I will break down the Grapefruit League games that we get, any takeaways that we should have on the players that have performed well or performed poorly, any other storylines that come up as it relates to constructing the Mets roster. We'll do some more preview stuff as we get into it as well. But I'm also going to spend a lot of time on the Mets farm system. So make sure you're tuning in every day. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, help me get to that 13,000 subscriber goal by opening day by hitting that red subscribe button, and also hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the latest Locked On Mets episodes. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. And then for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local host from each team, league-wide host from each league, by Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.